Welcome to our conversations with artificial intelligence and digital transformation leaders, data analytics, and technology leaders who are very passionate about the adoption of these technologies within our market. And we are very excited to be hosting another edition. Johan Steyn is with me. And we have got another exciting guest today, Craig Stewart, who is going to discuss with us these very important subjects, topics. And Johan, if you can introduce our guest today, please. Thank you.
Good, Zenzele, thank you. Like we always say, focusing on people in our local market, doing incredible things through technology. So it's a wonderful privilege today to have Craig Stewart with us on the recording. He is a community builder around data analytics and CISO, which is your Chief Information Security Officer, a hugely important role, ever more so every year, I think. He's a content creator and an event facilitator. He's also the founder of Dalebrook Media. He's got a very exciting LinkedIn newsletter, and we'll put those links in the video and in the YouTube description. Craig has been doing some incredible work and also, just really putting the message out there. So it's a wonderful privilege, Craig, to have you. Welcome to us. I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, Johan, Zenzele, thank you so much for having me, and very kind introduction. Equal privilege to be chatting to you guys today as well. So thanks for having me.
Cool. So Craig, I hope I did a fairly good introduction, but if I have to ask you, tell us about you in 2 or 3 minutes, what would you say?
Yeah, good. I think the LinkedIn profile is obviously quite descriptive. I guess you kind of hit the nail on the head there, Johan. It really is about community building, quite specifically in the data analytics and InfoSec communities in South Africa, but actually across Africa and the Middle East as well. And it's something I've been doing for nearly 7 years now, especially in the Chief Data Officer space. And just over the years, I've built up, networks in that space and seen that role grow and data analytics grow, almost not exponentially, but, it's grown fast in terms of the seniority of people in those roles and the number of chief data officers. Yeah, so through events, content, LinkedIn obsession, trying to get the message out there and connect people. So I think, that's kind of how I would describe myself, really, the community sort of builder in those spaces through the events and the newsletter and things like this. As you say, I love getting on recordings like this and, just talking about the subject. I'm not sure that was 2 to 3 minutes, but that's kind of what it is that I do. So.
Good stuff. Thank you. Ndlovu?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Craig, for that introduction about what you do and the wonderful work and the content that you're sharing out there about this very important subject.
Yeah.
You speak with a lot of people within the AI space, data analytics space, and so on. And I'm sure you have quite wonderful insights, so to say, in terms of what's happening as far as the adoption of these technologies is concerned. Maybe looking at artificial intelligence. What are some of the maybe challenges that executives are highlighting as an impediment in terms of implementing the technology? Artificial intelligence and all these other exponential technologies.
No, it's a good question. I think there's, this sort of desire to get AI in, and there's, cross business. If you take it out of the technical space, there's lack of understanding, but massive excitement about AI. And, you always see that figure of a sort of a humanoid type robot, and that's always applied to AI. I think Johan and I talked about that a while ago. I must say, like a lot of those insights, I'll just say before I get into it, I'm fortunate that so many people want to talk about this and share their knowledge, their insights. I'm not a data analytics technical person, although I've got a degree in information systems I never used. I have a bit of an understanding, but it's thanks to everybody in the community that I have these insights. So I think to your question, the adoption is certainly growing for sure. AI has been used in fraud analytics and risk analytics, for a fairly good amount of time now. And AI is actually, nothing incredibly new. Obviously, the adoption is increasing over time. I think what's holding companies back a couple of things. One is sort of a general lack of understanding of what AI can and should be used for. So, what is the actual use case for AI? I think a lot of executives just think it should be everywhere in the business. Everything should be automated. Everything should be able to learn by itself and make decisions by itself. But, from conversations I have, you really need to think about why you're using AI. It's not just AI for AI's sake. Not everything needs to have AI. And I think a lot of people out there think about a chatbot and they think, well, that's AI. Is that really useful? In some instances, absolutely it is. In others, maybe there's a better way to engage with clients and then with customers and so on. So I think it really depends on what you want to use AI for. Obviously, I think Johan and I talked about this a couple of weeks back, so forgive me if I'm kind of repeating and stealing what you said, but I think AI in things like cancer research and vaccine development and everything is excellent. But let's kind of keep it more to the corporate world. I think there's also the element of intelligent automation. And I think those are the two sort of distinct areas that people should really be looking at. AI is obviously the one thing. I think the intelligent automation is really something where there's a lot of value. And I think that's one of the areas I've seen a lot of people get right across the organization, not just in the data space, but in areas like internal audits and back office functions where they've actually automated high volume, low value tasks to a degree, things that take up a lot of human hours. Just processing things that can actually be done far better, far quicker through things like AI and intelligent automation. And that's not something that's necessarily going to take jobs. That's something that's going to actually enhance decision-making, accuracy, etc. So there's a lot of good use cases for it. Obviously, we've got to think about the ethics side of things when it comes to AI as well, which I can say a lot of companies are genuinely thinking about how they use AI and customer data ethically to make decisions, contact customers, serve customers, etc. So for me, I think it actually comes back, and I talk about this a lot. I think for me, the biggest challenge is access to high volumes of good quality data to actually feed the algorithms. And I think that's where a lot of companies kind of come unstuck. Executives are saying, we need AI, we need intelligent automation, we need the cost savings, we need to say that we're doing AI. The data people, okay, well, that's very good, but this is actually what you need to get there. You need a lot of very good quality data. So your data governance needs to come in there. Your data management needs to come in there. A lot of companies are still unsure of where all their data sources are across their organization. And that's something where you're feeding it in from structured to unstructured data. Data governance is not strong across all organizations. Most organizations still grapple with making the culture of data governance and data respect and data integrity a key part of their culture. So I think once companies get that right, then you'll see a massive increase in the adoption of AI and the value of AI. Because I think what will happen a lot of the times is that companies will put in AI, they get forced to do it, they feed the algorithm relatively low volumes of bad quality data. And obviously, what are they going to get there? They're going to get a machine that learns on bad data, basically, and it's just going to kind of compound the situation of this never-ending stream of really bad decisions and insights coming. So I think for me, that's the big thing. The AI is fantastic, machine learning, fantastic, huge amounts of value, but for me, it's the fundamentals that really need to be sorted out within organizations before the adoption curve really takes off.
So much you said that I just wanted to jump up and say, pick me. I want to comment. It's so good. And which actually really does lead me to this. My question is, in the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned the word chief data officer. And CDO, some companies that have a chief digital officer. In fact, I wrote about this in Business Day last week about should the person or the team in a corporate who looks after data, the data strategy, should they not be a C-suite executive rather than somebody in the corner of the IT department,
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear your views about the CDO, Chief Data Officer, because you've got your Chief Information Officer or Head of IT or whatever it's called, and he or she typically, I think, wants to have control over the data, although they're more an operational, keeping the lights on kind of person.
Yeah.
What is the importance of the CDO, and should this person sit at the top, given where we're going in this world of data, in your view?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm probably biased towards the chief data officers, but I do think it should really have a seat at the table with a mandate if it's going to have any real impact across the organization. In saying that, I've seen a lot of chief data officers grow closer to that role. They may not be, in the full C-suite just yet, but they've got a lot closer to that position. And I think certainly now with things like POPIA, other data compliance, very, very essential to have that role within the organization. And not every organization is going to be comfortable with having a chief data officer, but they need to have someone who is the most senior person who looks after data within that organization, and very much around things like the data strategy, the data governance, the data culture, etc. As you say, Johan, there's the chief CIO, CTO, etc., that is effectively looking after the technology that can deliver the architecture of the data and the insights. But I think a CIO is not always interested in a MLOps environment or the next AI model or whatever. That should sit within the data team. And I think also, there's a lot of literature and a lot of talk around the different phases of a chief data officer as well, what stage they're in. So whether they're in a very defensive sort of stage, they're setting up data governance for compliance and various other things, versus more on the offensive side, where it's the use of insights to actually improve business, through better decision making. So I think for organizations, it's a little bit tough. I think it depends on where they are in their data journey as to where that CDO needs to sit. Like, obviously, I'd love all organizations to have a chief data officer. It increases the size of our network for sure. But since I started, it's grown probably tenfold, the number of chief data officers in South Africa alone. And those are just the ones on LinkedIn with the title. There's probably many more out there. Reach out to myself, Zenzele, Johan, if you're a chief data officer and we haven't spoken to you yet, so that we can build up that community. But yes, I'd love to see it at more of an exco level. I think it also depends on the size of the organization and the type of organization. A lot of fintechs, startups, etc., who have started with data, at the heart of everything that they're doing as a digital business, a cloud-based business, the chief data officer has often been employee number 2, 3, 4, 5, like early. And they're very much at that board level. I think it's just your big organizations that are, slowly getting to that point where the CDO moves up. I don't know if you guys have seen anything different from the work that you've
done. So in my space, I agree with you, Craig. I think sorry, Zenzele. No, we'll ask you now, because I'll give you my 2 cents worth, and it's only worth 2 cents sometimes, I feel. But yes, it's because in your big mammoth corporations, data is still not seen for what it should be. So it's a lot about control and giving control. So giving someone or a team the control over data is a huge cultural change. It's a data culture. It's a cultural change. It's not a technology change at first. I don't know, Zenzele, in your conferences and the stuff you do, what's your view on this?
Yeah, I agree. I think, what Craig says is very important, that the role of the chief data officer, or the growing number of chief data officers, could be attributed to the need of the quality of data to implement all these technologies, data analytics, artificial intelligence. So the foundation is that quality of data, which I agree with you, Johan, as well. So when you look at the business case is sometimes very important or difficult to define the business case for an artificial intelligence. But find that the business case is defined, and the organization has seen the commercial value or the need to implement AI. The data aspect is defined and the quality data is gathered, but there's still a challenge of cybersecurity, and as we increase the adoption of this technology, we are increasing the risks of cybersecurity. And Craig, maybe that leads to my next question, because obviously you work with these cybersecurity experts, and maybe I want to understand in terms of the outlook as far as cybersecurity is concerned. Are we really building cyber resilient organizations? Are we prepared for the risks, and maybe what are the trends? What's happening?
Yeah, look, I think for the most part, companies are certainly constantly trying to become more cyber resilient. I think it's one of those things where attackers are always ahead of the game in terms of how they penetrate companies. But there's some really good technology out there and some very, very smart people on that. I think if you look at the stats, I think something like 86% of South African companies have had a data breach at some point. And I think the thing with that is it sounds scary. It sounds like someone's infiltrated our organization, that got behind the firewall, all this sort of thing. But I think the key thing, Zenzele, is a lot of it is internal and very often not malicious as well. So a lot of the CISOs that I speak to, they talk about building this culture of cyber awareness within the organization, phishing attacks, etc. Looking at a massive organization like a bank where there's, tens of thousands of employees, how do you control everything that they do? From this is the data that you can have access to, this is what you're allowed to do with the data, can you take your laptop home, can you download a spreadsheet? Sometimes people just don't know that what they're doing actually constitutes a breach or puts the company at risk. And I think that's the big thing. I think, to go back to the AI point, AI does an incredible job of constantly monitoring the attacks, the external attacks on an organization, and being able to alert people and change things and whatever it may be. But it's that human element internally where a lot of the risks actually come in. So I think I've seen a lot now where there's actually roles within organizations, big organizations too, like head of cyber awareness. So that person's sole job is to go out and educate the entire organization, from the board level right down to your sort of entry level employee, on what are the risks, what you can do, what you can't do. Don't click on this. If you look at the bottom of emails from most of the banks, it's we'll never send this type of email or whatever it may be. So I think that those are the risks. I think there's always going to be attacks. I mean, I speak to someone like Paul Morley from the banks, and he'll tell stories about the amount of times they get hits. It's constant. I mean, they're very, very cyber resilient, most organizations. If you look at just the number of pure attempts that outside hackers are having a go trying to find weaknesses into the system, and for the most part the security is pretty good. It's where there's that weak link internally is where the breach really comes. The technology itself is very sound.
I worked with a banking client, and they reckon that they have about 300 to 400 breaches or attempts at breaches a day. And this is not some guy in his underpants in the garage. This is like state-sponsored, serious stuff. 300, 400.
Yeah.
Man, yeah. But I love what you're saying, because, and I think, yes, of course, banks in particular should protect themselves against these things, but some guy in a basement with the USB stick not knowing what he's doing, how do you, I always say you can't automate stupidity, but maybe you can't also cyber secure stupidity. So a lot of wisdom there. I'd love to end off with a bit more about your events, the community, maybe, and again, we can add it to the video website and the like, but just what's the stuff you're doing to get the community together, Craig?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for asking, Johan. I appreciate that. So next week, we've got our 2 events, Data Leaders Exchange, that happen on Tuesday and Thursday next week in Johannesburg and Cape Town, respectively. yeah, that really is for senior data analytics people to come and have deep interactions and conversations with each other around what's happening in their organizations. And that's really set up in a way that they're not massive events. It's not 300 people coming. It's not for all data enthusiasts. It's very much for that senior level of person to come and talk about some of their big challenges that they're facing. And we make it very interactive, through the panel discussions and, actually not waiting for the audience to ask questions, but actually asking them questions, getting them to chat about it, feedback, etc. So that's next week, Data Leaders Exchange. And then, a lot of roundtables that I host with various partners, getting, 10 to 15 CDOs, etc. In a room. We had a dinner at Marble the other night with OpenText, which was fantastic. Notwithstanding the fact that it's great food and great wine, the conversation was excellent too, to sort of talk about things like unstructured data, and regulation around that. And then, I'm doing some work with Microsoft as well, and various other companies. So a lot of it is, I push, I drive forward, but also we work with partners to bring people together. And it's always about the conversation. It's always about knowledge sharing. It's not about, well, this is what we do from a technology point of view. And I think it's just connecting people. I know that there's a couple of WhatsApp groups that exist now between data leaders that have met at the events that I've done in the past, and they stay in contact, and they're, I'm struggling with data governance in my organization. What are you guys doing? So I think, like what you guys do, it's just constant involvement, rather than saying, oh, I'm going to do one event a year and then I'll do something else in the meantime. I think it's a constant sort of body of work. But I will say, and because this will go out to a lot of people, everyone says, oh, you've done such an amazing job with the community, you do all this. I say, well, it's only good because people want to share. I could do as much as I want. If nobody wanted to come and share and participate and be so open with what's happening in their own organizations, none of this would exist. I'm sure you guys will agree. So I think, a lot of the credit has to go out to, the community themselves for being so open and willing to share.
Awesome.
Lovely
Thank
having you here. Zenzele, you want to wrap it up for us?
Sorry, Jay. Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Craig. You keep on doing the wonderful work there in building the communities and sharing that very important information about all these technologies. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And likewise, thanks for having me.
Cheers.